turning on the recording. We are now recording for the Board of Trustees meeting for October 20th, 2020. Call the meeting to order. May I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Chamberlain.
Here.
Trustee Clayton.
Here.
Trustee Goldstein.
I'm here.
Trustee Haber. Trustee Haber.
Here.
Trustee Hollander.
Here.
Trustee Jamerson.
Here.
President Norris.
Here. First item listed is the pledge. Oh, we already skipped the Pledge of Allegiance, which should have been removed anyway. First item of actual business is approval of minutes from the Board of Trustees meeting of October 6, 2020. Do I have a motion for approval?
So
I have
moved.
a few minor changes.
Okay. Cheryl, I think that was you moving. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. Now, what are the minor changes, please, Madam Clerk?
Trustee Chamberlain requested a few words substituted in her paragraph regarding the report on branding and education. Instead of oaks are dying, substitute oaks are declining. And oak deaths are higher than usual, just to add the word likely due to the extremely wet weather.
All right, then, well, if there is no objection, we will add those to the minutes for approval. Any other changes, questions? Hearing none, roll call, please, on a motion to approve the minutes of October 6, 2020.
Trustee Chamberlain.
Aye.
Trustee Clayton.
Aye.
Trustee Goldstein.
Aye.
Trustee Haber.
Aye.
Trustee Hollander.
Aye.
Trustee Jamerson.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, the minutes are approved. Thank you. Village ecologist is not here this evening. Treasurer's report. Hal, I saw your name pop up there.
Yes, I am here. Okay, I've got an update on the investment. I did not get the latest cash summary report. I'll ask Susie for that, make a comparison, and Mayor, I'll send you some quick notes on that. But I'm looking at the bulk of our assets right now. And the current position is, as you can imagine, the yields are eroding because our laddered approach is now probably 8 months, 9 months into the current yields of very insignificant returns. To give you an idea, we just renewed on October 1st, $490,000 of investments became available, on which we replenished at a municipal, which was the highest rate around, and that is 0.3%. To give you an idea of the environment in which we operate, what the current rates are, the benchmarks, the 1 year rates are around 0.09%, 2 year 1.4, 3 year 0.18, and 5 year 0.33. So even the curve going out 5 years does not give you much that we really want to lock in at those rates for 5 years. So we're staying short. As I'm looking at the maturity on the ones that we just got at 0.3% is a year. It's only 1 year out. So Danielle did a great job on that. The overall yield on our portfolio is 1.8%. So considering what I just read in terms of the available yields, our old yields, who would have thought looked that good, but they do. The cash yield of what we can expect from the portfolio is still impressive. It's about $186,000 a year is what we will yield on the investments as is. And the upcoming, we do have quite a bit coming up in the next, as I said, the entire duration will flip in about a year, but we have about $1 million coming up in the next 30 days and $2.5 million within the next 90 days. The JP Morgan Group does not expect much change. Election or no election, interest rates are pegged to be pretty consistent right now in this ballpark. So They'll keep our terms short, our renewals about pace, but I told her to make sure that, and Danielle knows, we're not going to stretch in terms of quality or risk to get a little bit of a higher yield. It's, first of all, it's not available. And second of all, it's not worth it. So they've done a good job. We're just in a very declining market, and pretty soon the portfolio yield will decrease because of that.
Nice. Thank you, Hal. Are there any questions for the treasurer? All right, then.
I have a question, John.
Yeah.
I do too, after Michael.
Go ahead, Mike, and then Eric.
So it's really not necessarily for Hal, but just for the issue of yield. And I know that we recently sold bonds in connection with an SSA to Village of Riverwoods bonds for 2.4%. And I think they were bought by Northside Community Bank. Is there any way where we can actually benefit by holding those bonds ourselves and trying to achieve a 2.4 yield, which is now significantly greater than what our overall yield on our portfolio is? Or is that not an appropriate investment?
Bruce, can you opine on that? Can we hold our own?
Yeah, I mean, probably we can. We have an investment policy. I'd have to see whether our investment policy would want us to be overly concentrated in that. I think we've talked about it in the past with certain smaller issues. And then the board had the concern that we'd be overly concentrated if we took on a larger, share of those. Unfortunately, we don't have many at this point. The ones we do have are not prepayable. They're a fixed 10-year return.
I think that duration loan would probably put us in a tough spot in compliance with the investment policy.
Well, I think that there's a concentration risk. I'd have to look at that. I mean, in terms of eligible investments, there might be an exception because we make loans between funds and we don't apply typical credit criteria. We made a loan to the TIF fund from the general fund. We're holding a note that's not really any different from a bond. And so as a type of an interfund loan, that probably could be authorized. So I'm not saying that we would be precluded from it, but I think it would be reviewed in terms of the overall structure of the investment portfolio.
What was the amount, Michael, that was picked up by Northside?
I don't recall exactly, Bruce, I'm sure you know, but I know that the rate was 2.4, which looks pretty appealing based upon what we're hearing from Hal now.
It was a small bond, Michael. It was only about $84,000, the last one. So it wasn't
If
very
it was
much.
only $84,000, then the concentration issue is probably not an issue either. But
Right.
To the extent that we could pick up some of those smaller ones when we have these declining rates, it might be something that we should consider. We can always modify that in the future and stop doing it. But right now, if we're trying to achieve yield, and we know that basically it's secured by the real estate property taxes, it doesn't appear to be a risky investment, but yet it has a pretty nice return.
Yeah, I'll Bruce, if you want to look at anything in addition, I'll look at the investment policy. And if you can send me specs on that issuance or another recent one that went out as far as duration and amount, I'll be glad to consider that, because you're right. And even if we, have a little bit longer length on it, so we're going to be in jeopardy of, having market yields greater than 2.45 is going to be a few years. So
We should only hope that we get where those become good rates, or bad
Yeah.
rates, I should say.
right, but that's a good suggestion, Michael.
In the past, we've always not wanted to be the First National Bank of Riverwood, so to speak. But that was more a matter of trying to give out lower rates. In this case, it's benefiting our treasury. So I think it's a very good suggestion. Eric, you had a question?
Yeah, I have two questions. I took a look at some of our investments and I noticed that there was two of our bonds and correct me if I'm wrong, that were below the top two ratings, which I think our investment policy states we have to be in the top two ratings. Is there a consequence if we are holding bonds or investments that are not in the top two ratings?
It
And to be specific, the Goldman Sachs and the American Express bonds, I believe, are not in the top two ratings.
I believe those are CDs and they were fully insured. And I don't know, the Goldman Sachs, I don't believe, I'll check it. I see what you're, what was it? The Goldman Sachs and what was the other American?
Yeah, and the American Express.
I'll look into those, but I also will look into the ratings as when we got it.
Well, my question is there a consequence if we're holding something that doesn't fall into those top two
No,
categories?
it- it's our policy and our guideline. And the consequence would be if we ever had a default and we experienced a default because we invested in a lower grade bond, or in this case, a CD. But the CDs are very low risk. Regardless of rating, we still try to get the higher rating on them, but they're collateralized. And I don't want to say we've never had one, and their duration is usually very short on those. But I'll look into those to see what the ratings were when we originally acquired it too.
Okay, and then one more question. Is there a policy to sell a bond if it is downgraded?
There's really no policy. And the question is, as any investor would make a decision, are you better to hold this to duration just because it's downgraded? Doesn't necessarily mean that it's in higher risk of default. And what will the market yield do to it if we do sell it? How much will we lose of our principal depending on the downgrade? But we haven't really experienced a significant downgrade to a bond that would move into a low risk or junk category, to my knowledge, yet. But I'll also inquire from JP Morgan whether they have the ability to monitor us based on the holding right away to see what their opinion is, whether this is something we should bail from, or it would be common to that structure that a downgrade is a far call from a default.
Well, this is also something I think we should ensure is what we do would be included in our policy, so that if we find something's downgraded, or just how we review it and how we go about deciding whether we should be selling it or not.
Right. And I don't know if the policy addresses that per se. It usually was focused on the purchase of it
Quality.
rather than a downgrade. And usually it's like any other market investment. You wish you were ahead of the curve and you didn't hold it while it was being downgraded. Once it is, how much of your principal would you lose by getting out of it versus the risk of losing all of it? And hopefully the grades that we're talking about don't have that risk.
And I agree that's the decision process, but I do think it should be set out as part of the policy as how we would do that review. And my recollection is that it's not, but I would have to reread it at this point. So those are all very good questions.
Okay, I will, I'll follow up with what's in the policy, and also what we can get heads up notice when there is such a downgrade.
Right, and then talk about what criteria we would use to be deciding whether to dispose of it or continue to hold.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments in relation to the treasurer's report? Hearing none, engineers report.
We had the pre-construction meeting for the road project for this year this morning. The plan is to start with the Kingswood Court project. They'll start mobilizing out on Wednesday of next week, weather permitting. Assuming that we don't have, another snowy Halloween like last year, there's still time to get, it's a small project. We can still knock it out in a couple of weeks. And I'm still waiting. On the bike path repairs, we did get out and fix there was one B box that was a trip hazard, but I don't think our contractor's been out to do the paving work. I didn't hear from him today, but that is going to be scheduled in the next couple of weeks.
Any questions for the engineer? All right, then moving on, Director of Community Services report. Russ, you're muted still.
Okay, back on. Vivian and I finished cleaning up all the permits and stuff that we've received in the office within the last month, so we're up to date with all that stuff. We have a pile of stuff sitting in her office yet that was there when she took over. So we're gonna start to work our way through that, see what's there. Had our landscaper out. We got Wiggum Road cleaned up and trimmed up. We had some complaints over there. So if anybody knows of any areas, if the leaves are excessive, I drove around today. I made a couple of notes, but the trees are going to start to fall and fill up these ditch lines with all these leaves. So we're going to get him to get out there and start cleaning up what he can, cut back the brush from the tree limbs and stuff from the signs, or all the stop signs, the street signs. So if anybody has anything that they see and they want clean, please just send me an email or a text and I'll put it on the list to get it to them. Because I figure, like Pat says, with the weather, we got maybe another month or so, 5 weeks, and then they'll be done. So get this stuff done before the snow hits. And other than that, that's about it for now.
Any questions for Russ? All right, zoning board did not meet. Plan commission report.
Is Lori here?
No.
Well, the Plan Commission, I think, did we last meet? Didn't I already report at the last meeting on the Plan Commission's meeting? I think I did, because the last meeting, we forwarded their recommendation in the board, then referred the text amendment back to Plan Commission. So there hasn't been a meeting since then. The next
Plan
meeting
commission
is,
met on the 1st, so that was before our meeting.
the next meeting will be November 4th.
Okay, police report.
The activity is in your packets, and then I have something up later on the agenda.
Any questions for the chief? Okay, village attorney's report.
I don't have anything in particular. There has been some more discussion about potential uses of the landfill site. I feel like there's activity brewing. There's going to be some further requests to us. And one of the things, maybe this does tie into the Plan Commission, the Plan Commission was going to examine potential uses involving property on the north side of Deerfield Road near the intersection with Milwaukee. I thought that was probably the more likely thing to come before us first, but we've been asked some questions about what kind of uses the village would more willingly embrace on the landfill parcel. Since these are all preliminary discussions, we don't have an actual proposal. I don't see anything really worth talking about exactly, other than the general land use question always about the landfill parcel has not gone away. I just want to let the board know that, and that one of the options, again, being just chatted about or discussed, is some type of multifamily use. But there are a couple of other uses that have been mentioned, and so if we hear more, we'll be back in touch with you when we have more to talk about.
But what about the corner? We haven't talked about Thornton's for a little bit. I think the board might.
That's a good point. So the site plan that the developer for the Thorntons put together would tie in the new gas station to the entrance that CubeSmart has, with an east-west access drive that runs across the north part of the CubeSmart property. It basically is their east-west access drive right now, but they would just basically use it as well for access to the gas station. CubeSmart thought that was problematic potentially, because there might be enough capacity with just 2 lanes. And so they asked the developer to consider 3 lanes. They didn't say no, they said, yes, we'll consider the access path that you're showing us. But do some more homework, see if you can expand the width of those access lanes so there's basically more room for cars. That as soon as you start adding more width to that east-west access drive, you start encroaching further towards the right-of-way, towards the detention and things like that. So I think they're working through the engineering revision right now. Their job is to secure CubeSmart's consent, because without CubeSmart's consent, the site plan that they think is the only site plan that works for the site won't work. So they're busy having those discussions, and we've asked them to keep us posted.
Okay, yeah, Rick.
I just have a question for Bruce. You said that there's been some renewed activity on the 37 acres, or at least it sounds like there's going to be. And it sounds like somebody's giving information back to these people, and I'm just wondering how that's being driven and what the responses are that we're giving them. I don't want to drive people away with responses that the board may not be in agreement with. Does that make sense?
I think we're very conscious of that and don't try and speak for the board. And the last conversation started as a couple of emails from the property owner, and Trustee Hollander replied that those are interesting suggestions and we'll have to get back to you. So we didn't commit to anything. And then I heard independently from another source that I can't really discuss, but I understand there's someone else looking at the site potentially. I don't know what their possible use would be, but probably multifamily.
So we're not foreclosing anything before it would come to the board. We would just try to find out as many parameters and think about what could be concerns, but we certainly don't want to discourage anybody either.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Rick, go ahead.
I have a question.
Mike, go ahead.
With regard to the Thorntons, you indicated that this right of way or this roadway would be on the north side of the storage facility. But wouldn't Thorntons have access to the roadway that is behind the storage facility already? And why wouldn't that be suitable for their access? But I thought that was the whole plan when it was done that way, was to have access to that corner as well as to the storage facility. So I'm just a little befuddled by this.
Mike, they do have that access, but Thornton said that they would want to have the access in front or prefer that if the storage facility was agreeable, because it's greater visibility and a cleaner access. So they believe it's in their interest. But you are correct. They do have we have an easement on the south side that they could use.
I think one difference might be that while that access that we created through the cross easements could be more than sufficient for a restaurant or, you know, a small food use, for example, when they looked at the pattern of traffic from a gas service station, I think they were looking for something more enhanced.
And so far, the storage people have been very cooperative, so hopefully everything will still be working through. Any other questions? All right. Then moving forward to information items, before I get to the two that are listed, I would like to say that the engineer is still looking at the water situation as to the high bills that came out in September. Right now, we've gone through everything. Pat can describe it in greater detail. We don't want to say too much until we've investigated everything. We're now at the point of pulling 3 meters in Thorngate to have them bench tested and then put back in to make sure there's nothing that's gone wrong with them that way, to try and test it out. So with any luck, we went through to find the people who were complaining about large bills. We figured that if there was a problem, that would be the best place to look. 2 of those backed out because of COVID concerns or the like. And so we've had to work around that. Hopefully we'll know something more that we can address in the near future. Then moving on to the items that were listed, discussion of the Village Code 4.2.1, certain nuisances, especially uncut turf grass and weeds. This was at the request of one of the trustees. We had a situation where a house that was not being lived in is supposed to be torn down and something built, etc. Had some rather unsightly growth around it. And the question was whether it was a naturalized area or whether it was simply somebody ignoring the maintenance on the property. And I think Eric had asked this come up. Part of it, I think, Eric, the question was how can we tell the difference? Is there some way we can work around it? Because it's a little hard to know which is which sometimes. So Eric, you're the one, Cheryl wants to talk, so. But Eric, you were the
I'm
one-
going to answer Cheryl's question though, because I did talk to Steve and Steve sent me a map. And I mean, the issue is that much of the first of all, I'll say the problem has mostly been mitigated really over the last couple of weeks because I think they received a phone call from somebody at the village. I believe it was Russell who made the call, but I guess some of it's protected woodlands, and I guess the question becomes is, do protected woodlands need to be maintained? And much of the protected woodlands that we're talking about at this home are in their front yard. And the person across the street from them are selling their home and it became an issue. And then somebody else who's somewhat involved with the village in some capacity came to me and asked if anything could be done. Did end up cutting their grass, but you know, I did take a look at our ordinance and maybe this, I don't have an answer to the solution, but the house is vacant. And I know that we do have a vacant property ordinance. And I think that we should try to enforce that for this specific property, even though I believe they say somebody does live there, but I actually don't think it's possible that somebody could live in this home in the condition that it's in. That's just my opinion.
I drove by and I frankly thought it was an unkept situation. And if they paid somebody to take care of it, they didn't get their money's worth.
Right.
It's an
So
easy
maybe,
answer, but-
so maybe we could put something, I think really the solution is it's a vacant property ordinance to be enforced. I think if we had that information and somebody had spoken to the owner of this property with the expectations, you know, about some of our other ordinances, I think the problem would have been mitigated from the start.
So,
But I know there's some garbage, like I think Trustee Jamerson had some issues with garbage on somebody else's lawn. I don't know if this is a time to talk about that or if there's anything else we can really do. Because I don't think we could. I did some research and I couldn't find anything more than we already have, but the problem has been resolved right now.
Cheryl, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to the difference between turf grass, identifying an area that's turf grass or a woodland. We had AES go through the village and using a particular methodology identified all of the woodland areas in the village. And there is a map for every single property. So it's quite easy to identify what's a woodland and what is just turf grass or weeds or whatever it is. As far as the quality of the woodland, that will vary from property to property. I do know on this particular property, it is one of the only ones in the area that has a woodland. It had quite a few, I believe, ash and elm that came down, so it doesn't look as good as it might have. And as far as maintaining your woodland, of course, we would love everyone to maintain their woodlands as best as possible and keep out invasives. And that's how you maintain your woodland.
So, but of course, part of this is it's hard to maintain the freedom that we normally want to let people have on their own property while still trying to make sure that it is maintained properly for their neighbors. It's always a dichotomy that is difficult for us. As far as watching vacant property, we probably do need to make sure we try to keep a closer eye on that than perhaps we have been. Mike Hebert. Mike, you're muted, Mike.
So what about someone who has turf grass that wants to convert it to woodlands and so lets it just grow out and it becomes unsightly, but eventually they start to plant it, woodlands, et cetera. So it's actually part of a scheme,
right,
to turn it into a woodlands. Do we have something in the ordinance that would allow the nuisance to continue for a period of time so as to allow for the conversion to the woodlands?
So,
Mike,
yeah, we do.
Do we?
Well,
I didn't think we did.
Well, we have a process. So if people are doing it on their own and not doing it through the cost share, then it's kind of hard to say what one person would do versus another. But we do have a process for expanding your woodland, and I can tell you about it because I've done it on my own property. I went through the native seeding cost share program, and there's a process that you go through. And that part of my property is blocked off so that it isn't mowed. But it's not like you just don't mow it and you just let it go. If you are developing a new woodland, you cut it down at certain periods to certain heights so that the natives grow. And as a matter of fact, we've all seen that process take place right in the circle drive in the middle at the village hall. That's exactly what we did.
The only thing that,
You've seen
Cheryl, is that we don't have anything if people don't want to use the cost share. They should do it the way you're talking about. But I think Mike's question goes that what if somebody just wants to let it go? How do we distinguish between somebody that says, I'm going to be lazy?
We have a
and not
process
mow it?
for that also. If they want to have a certain area delineated as a woodland and they haven't gone through the particular cost share program, we can have AES come out and use that same methodology and determine whether or not it would constitute.
Well, but Cheryl, they'd have to talk to us first. That's the whole point.
Right.
And we wouldn't be citing them because they're not violating any rules. If they talk to us, life is very easy in most cases. We have several residents with that problem right now.
Right, so it's not a new woodland until they go through the process, because otherwise the prior map is in place. And so they would have to let us know for a new woodland area to be delineated.
Let me ask you, Mike, are you suggesting that we should have it where people have to tell us first? Or you're raising the question as you often do, but I'd like to know what you think is the right answer.
I just think there's a disconnect. I think that I've seen, in fact, in a couple of locations in the village, I can think of one right off the top of my head, two actually I can think of off the top of my head, where people over the 35 years that I've been in the village have just taken a manicured area and let it go.
Right.
Just stop doing it. And it is obviously no longer manicured and has seemingly woodlands. I mean, it might be a lot of buckthorn and it might be a lot of other things, but it's definitely not turf grass any longer. And I doubt very highly that they did anything with the village to actually get approval of that process. I don't know that we want people to have to get approval. I'm the liberal on the board.
On this sort of thing, so am I.
I think that someone should be able to do that, frankly. So there is no mechanism for that right now in this Chapter 2 nuisances statute. It basically says at some point in time, if I don't cut my grass, I could potentially be a nuisance, notwithstanding the fact that it may be intentional.
And maybe somebody decides to let it go all summer and then does it once each time. And how do we go? Where do we take their word? And it's just a hard place to go. And I'm not sure I have a good answer. Bruce?
I think the board can probably take comfort in the fact that the overzealous prosecution of nuisances hasn't really been one of our strong points.
If anything, we're on the other side, as we just admitted to. So, well, let's everybody
take
think
comfort in
about
that.
that problem, because I don't know that any of us have a good answer for it. It'd be nice to say we could take everybody at their word, but I don't think any of us are that foolish anymore. So let's think about it. Henry, you wanted to talk about the 10 cubic yards of dirt issue. It's much the same.
Yeah. When I saw this was on the agenda, I remember it from about a year and a half ago, where we had an incident when we were having staff meetings where someone would bring in 10 yards of soil or some other material, which is all that's allowed by our ordinance. And then a week later, they'd bring another 10 yards in, and theoretically they could do that on an ongoing basis. All we do is limit a single dump to 10 yards, but we don't limit the number of times one can make that 10-yard addition. So I was just thinking, if we're going to redo any of these ordinances related to this area, that I'd clarify it. I'm not bringing it up, excuse me. I'm not suggesting that we redo any ordinance just for this purpose, but if we do them, just add this to the lists.
Well, I do think that that is, as you noted, and something that we apparently haven't followed up as well as we should have. So Bruce, let's think about that one, because I would want to put a time limit. This idea that you could do 10 weeks and bring in 100 yards is not something we'd want. And I think it is silent on that. So,
Hey, John,
yes.
just one more comment, because now that winter's coming, I don't believe there's going to be any more problems with 1935 Calvin Court until the spring. Is it possible that we can enforce the vacant property ordinance for that property?
Well, we should, but what exactly are you expecting it to be?
Well, I would have to review our vacant property ordinance or review it with.
There's basically, it says they have to maintain the property. And when I drove by, I think the only thing we noticed was the landscape not being well maintained. If you see
Well, I
problems,
thought it also said it had to be habitable. I think it also said, I mean, there's some other things in that ordinance that I think it's not in compliance.
Eric, as I drove by, I didn't see anything that would have told me that it wasn't habitable. If you believe it isn't, then send us a note on it and we'll take a look at it. But
Well, at least it wasn't when I've been in the home. It was full of mold.
Well,
okay.
If I can jump in.
Go ahead, Rick. It's pretty open.
And I had this discussion with the people at 345 Thorn Meadow. In order for it to be habitable, it has to have running water, an operating sewer system, and that's about it. That's all it takes to be habitable.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that says you can't have black mold or anything else. As far as yourself, you can't sell it with that, I don't think, but.
No. So either we need to adjust the ordinance as to what we consider a vacant property or abandoned property. But right now, I mean, even if there's a giant hole in the roof, that doesn't create an inhabitable property.
But I'll digress after this, but I think in the ordinance, I'd have to check it again. I believe the property owners have plans to demolish the property. I think that's what they told either Russell. And if they do, I think that they have to have plans written out and a timeline written out. And I thought that was part of that ordinance as well.
But Eric, even then, what if they decide that they want to live there some of the time and some of the time they want to live in Florida? How do you define which is which?
Well, an entity owns the property, so that would be hard.
So this is the whole problem. We all know what we want. It's just putting it in a way that is legal and enforceable that gets hard.
But I did talk to that homeowner, and they have plans to tear down the house and start a new house next spring. That was her goal, they said, she said. So,
Okay, well, it's been almost 3 years since they told me that 3 years ago.
I can't help that. I've been here 2 months, so, I can just tell
Well,
you, the last month
even
I
then,
talked.
Russ, that it still wouldn't be anything you could do anything about necessarily.
That's right. I mean, right now,
That's the problem.
yeah, it looks like it needs a lot of work. It does need work. And they're in the process of doing that. Believe it, I was here before we had homes that were abandoned and not used. Right across the street from the village hall, we had 2 of them that sat there for years that weren't used and abandoned, and it took us a while to get them down. So
The temporary village hall wouldn't have qualified as habitable. We had mold, we had to close
Oh.
off certain rooms, et cetera. So
Yeah.
again, Eric, we're not unsympathetic. It's just how to define it is the hard part in all of those cases.
and then what are you going to do if they say they're going to build a new home and they don't want to take it down now? I mean, I don't know what their finances are or what they're going to do, but I mean, that's their plan. So there's
Only
nothing-
when it becomes a risk to others, et cetera,
Right.
you've got to go to court to get an order on it, et cetera.
Maybe
broken windows. Or if I see broken windows or the chief gets some complaints that, kids are in there or something like that, then, we can make them board it up, which is going to look ugly, but we could do it from that safety standpoint because I've done that already. And, that's our only other option. But right now, I walked around the house a week ago. It's, there's nothing open there. So it's,
maybe someone
Mike.
could educate them and tell them that if they
They're
tear-
realtors. They're not exactly unknowledgeable.
but if they
Mike.
tear down their residence, then they can get a lower tax bill because it becomes vacant property as opposed to improved property. And it would seem, if they've had this idea for 3 years and they've been paying for improved property for 3 years, it's very foolish.
We can pass that along to them, but being realtors, et cetera, they should be aware of it, but I'll take the suggestion and we'll work with it.
Yep.
Okay, any other comments? And not, I'd like to move on then to turning the floor over to the engineer on the water projects. We wanted, before we went too far with this, there are a couple of issues here that we wanted to talk to the board to find out what path should be designing towards. Both of these projects have merit, but there are questions that are out there. So Mr. Engineer, let me turn it over to you.
Okay, hopefully everybody had a chance to absorb the memo and the maps that I put together and sent out. I apologize, I didn't get them out sooner. You'll recall that we'll start on Riverwoods Road. Mr. Sakaris at 2375 Riverwoods Road came to a board meeting some months ago. He was in his water was in really bad shape, and he was asking what the village could do to make Lake Michigan water available to him. The general gist from the board was, yes, we want to help a resident out here. At the time, there was consideration. Effectively, he was saying, look, I'll build the water main. Can I get a recapture? In the interim, things kind of evolved. I did suggest to him that we could work something out if he could get an easement from the neighbor behind him just to run a service down to Forest Glen. Does everybody have the map? Is probably, I can share my screen or probably useful. I guess you all have the packet. Clearly, to me, the simplest thing for him to do would be to run a service down to Forest Edge Drive. He has not talked to that neighbor about that option. When I asked him, he felt that it wasn't his responsibility to talk to that homeowner, and said this is something that the village needs to sort out. As far as what the village could do, those are the two options on Riverwoods Road that I've laid out and put rough estimates to. As I noted in my memo, if we water main from Studio Lane down Riverwoods Road, basically through the properties that are relatively dense there, we could arrive at a project that comes pretty close to paying for itself. You know, it's if everyone was to connect, or if and when everyone connected.
Is
But
it
really-
extension 1, Pat?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. Extension 1 is a project that we could do, and it should come pretty close to a wash again when and if all properties, currently unserved properties, connect to the new main. What I realized when I laid that out was then we've got the remainder of Riverwoods Road to the east, where there's really only 3 properties that would ever be served by that water main. So it would, if we consider these on purely, the economics of do the connection fees pay for the infrastructure, effectively, that piece of main would never make sense to get built. So I wanted to bring this to the board for consideration. I did also mention that I think it's time we revisit that water connection fee, assuming that we're going to continue to use the economics of the project as the primary factor in deciding where and when to build water main. That it's been nearly 10 years that we haven't adjusted that connection fee. So it's getting more and more difficult to draw up projects where the connection fees come close to paying for the cost of that installation. So I did suggest that the board give consideration to the overall project on Riverwoods Road. It of course, there's a system benefit. It's always best to loop the mains. And again, we run into this situation where if it only becomes more and more unlikely that segment of the water system would never get built, because it's never going to serve more than 3 homes. I guess with that, we can maybe we can talk through this one, or maybe we can bounce over to the one up on Little Woodland Lane, because it kind of brings up some similar considerations.
I have a question on this one first, if we could do it.
Sure.
You muted, Mike.
Yeah, Mike,
There-
there you go.
Is there a possibility of actually looping the system by extending the water main? I think that's Big Oak.
That's what I was gonna
and
say.
Getting an easement, through lot 6 or 7 or something, and then picking up the Riverwoods Road, kind of half extension.
Yeah.
That was gonna be my suggestion, Mike. You're reading my mind.
And always, this is the perennial conundrum in Riverwoods, is dead end streets lead us to dead end water mains. And so we are in a position where, certainly 100% we could go and talk to, 6 Big Oak, 7 Big Oak, and see if they'd be willing to grant an easement to run through their property. It still doesn't solve, the issue of, really, I guess we'd probably want to run between 8 and 9. So we
Right,
could
that's what I was gonna say.
few properties. And it largely comes down to,
Save.
people's willingness to grant easements, and everything's in negotiation. 9 already has water service, so would 8 allow us to build through there? It wouldn't shock me if 8 said, sure, I'll give you an easement, you give me a water connection. But yeah, I mean, there's when we really start digging into these, there are limitless permutations, and usually as a starting point for a new village water main, I'll try to work where we already have existing easements or rights of way. But it definitely is worth considering. If somebody on the board knows those folks, they're worth talking to.
Well, maybe Russ can talk to, can start that conversation, because that's going to save, I would think, a significant amount of money, because extension 2 would be really truncated.
I say, I used to know one of those families, but haven't seen each other in 30 years, and I'll leave it at that. So I may not be the one to be calling.
So
Go ahead.
so I would, I'm glad Mike brought Trustee Haber brought this up. I would go between 8 and 9, like Pat said. But I also think that if there's a way to get water to 2375 without putting the main in at all, I think, we should, if the homeowner doesn't want to talk to those people about getting an easement, we should talk to them about getting an easement. That would save the village a lot of money. We're talking with extension 1 and 2, we're talking $560,000, and possibly less, probably less if it went between 8 and 9. But the water fund only has like $1.4 million in it, and that's more than a third of what's in there, and we're not sure that any of those people other than 2375 are going to want to tap on.
I
You
will
think
say this, one of our past objections is we've had a policy against extending across another person's property normally to extend mains. That being said, I personally don't have an objection to it. I just tell you that's history. I think council's going to tell you why we have had the policy not to do it normally.
Well, the issue that we have is that someone is on the end of a street, they see the water main across the street, and they want to do a connection like this. And many times we've said, organize with your street. The idea is to extend the water system in a rational fashion. So not for me to tell the board what to do. I would only say that if we have an individual connection like this, at least think through what the policy would be when 2 other people on the street want the same thing. Then what's the principal basis in which the village can say to one person, we don't like that extension, but this one we like. If we do that, it does put us in a hard place, because we don't quite know when we're supposed to agitate for the common good and try and get a bigger project. And we used to kind of refer to these as spaghetti connections. What happens if you have too many of them? When you see something like this and you don't know how everyone is going to respond, you kind of think, well, how can we help out the situation? Maybe at a minimum, before the village would do something like that, it probably should at least try and contact all of the people to see who would be involved and would be interested, because otherwise, we're assuming.
Yeah, and this is where it really starts to get, it gets complicated and time consuming for village staff, because you have the perennial question of, well, how much is it going to cost me? And Russ, you'll remember this when we were looking at water main in South Riverwoods and all the various colored maps you made up of the yeses and the nos, and how we could run water main around, and what it would cost, and how we could get to the balance, and the amount of time and energy that went into trying to sort that out. And I'm not saying it's not the right thing to do. It just, what we have here is, a resident who came to us, basically saying he's got an emergency situation. And, the reality is, by the time we go through that process, the South Riverwoods, it took 3 or 4 years before we finally landed on the project that we built on Thorn Meadow and over to Juneberry. So it's the timing part for this particular resident didn't seem to allow for, canvassing the neighbors and going through that whole process of all the different permutations.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Mike.
I think it's somewhat obvious that his emergency has waned a bit because we haven't really heard much from this gentleman in a while. So I don't know if the water table has risen or something, or he's figured out another way to get water. But if I recall correctly, this is like, 6 months ago or so when he was basically, I have no water and I can't live in my house.
If I could jump in, trustee Haber, we've actually heard from him a number of times in the interim. And again, at first, after the board meeting he was at, he was contacting engineers and putting contractors in place, and he was going to do something. And then it kind of evolved to where it just turned into, hey, is anybody doing something about this? I still need water. And, really with my last exchange with him, he pretty much put the whole thing in my lap saying, look, what's the village going to do here?
But Pat, I would say that trustee Haber has made the good point that it's no longer burning the telephone lines to me or coming to board meetings saying I need to be helped.
Agreed.
And so the way I look at it is like, he wasn't even willing to talk. I was all in favor of figuring out some way of getting him water because it sounded like it was such an emergency. And I was like, we should bend over backwards to do it. At least that was my position. But he's indicated that he's not even prepared to talk to his neighbor, to ask his neighbor for an easement. I mean, that seems to me a bit bizarre. And I don't think that we should start doing these so-called spaghetti connections, because I think, 2349 is going to ask for that next, or 2330 is going to ask for that after him. And we're going to have all these, shoots. And how are we going to say no to the neighbor when we did it for him? So I think we have to have a comprehensive plan. And to the extent that we're able to get 2375 water by doing a connection across his neighbor's property on Forest Glen, I guess that is, I would suggest that should be a temporary connection. And that connection should only exist until such time as there is a water main along Riverwoods Road, at which time he would be obligated to disconnect and then to reconnect onto Riverwoods Road.
I certainly think we need to be looking at trying to get all 11 homes into one project. And then, as you say, we can come down and loop otherwise, because I certainly want to tie it in, but if we can do that across 7, 8, or 9, that's not a problem. But yes, let's see, I think Cheryl, you were a little bit ahead of Henry, and then Henry, I know you wanted to say something. So Cheryl, please go ahead.
So this is not the best time for us to be spending the kind of money that I might spend at another time, because you're looking long-term. But I think at minimum, what we need to do is talk to these other folks to see what kind of interest they do have. And I understand that it's a little difficult to give them actual prices, but at least we can find out if they're interested at all in municipal water, because if they're not interested, then that's one thing. And then if they're interested, but tell me the price, that's another thing. I'm hesitant about doing the extend to all the way down. I like the idea better of perhaps going over through Big Oak, simply because this just isn't the best time to be spending a lot of money.
Well, if it meets the engineering need to go that way, then it's fine. That was the only reason to extend it. And that seems to be the best suggestion there. Henry, you had a comment?
Yep. Wasn't this the individual who said that they didn't want to consider even doing another well?
Yep.
But they wanted city water, and I won't do another well.
Yep.
That's a problem for me. And second of all, I like Cheryl's idea. It seems to me that it's to benefit Riverwoods if we were able to close this loop. And I certainly would send a letter out to the 11 homes and ask them if they're interested in doing city water, although not committing to it, but finding a level of interest and setting some number. If we can get at least half of them to commit to it before we do construction, I think we ought to revisit it then.
Well, Pat,
Well, the number is simply the connection charge plus No, for example, in the Thorn Meadow area where we had our water project, we told them we couldn't do it because their connection charges weren't adequate unless they each came up with a couple of thousand more, and they did. So we actually simply took the connection charge and we made it a slight adjustment, but we have a connection charge. So what they would spend to connect is that plus their own plumbing for, you know, whatever they have to do with their own wells and stuff. That's a separate factor. But we wouldn't go to them and simply divide the total project by 11 homes. We've never done that.
Unless it was less than the connection fee, and then we'd still go to it and just take the connection fee.
Right, but I mean, we have asked people where the contribution from the village was say more than 10% or something. We have asked for a slight bump in the connection charge if they wanted to do the project. But so I don't think we would. I just wanted to give you the idea that we wouldn't go to people and say it's the whole cost divided by 11. I think it's essentially, unless the board has a different policy, it's somewhere close to the connection charge.
And
Let me then come back to you on that. There's a difference of at least $300,000, and if everybody went and connected, we're still down 300,000 for the construction cost. Those monies are coming out of the water fund and not out of the general fund.
correct.
So that the people who are paying for water now and not the general village are the ones that are going to be subsidizing this. And I think that's a problem. I'm not on city water, so I'm not going to be one of those, but it seems to be unfair to the people who have water to be subsidized in these 11 homes.
Well,
It's the improvement of the village.
Henry, just so you know, though, before with a lot of these water project and SSAs, we only charge the connection. Money was advanced from the general fund to do it. And that was everybody then subsidizing those who do have water now.
Correct.
So it's
That's
never
always-
been matched up dollar to dollar, inch per inch.
I understand, but that's why I asked whether or not the remainder was going to be out of the water fund alone. I didn't get a chance to finish because the initial water production was partially funded by the general fund. So is the intent to partially fund this thing through a general fund or to fund it totally through the water fund?
Well,
Because I'd rather have that answer before I offer them water.
that is again up to the board. Let me get over to Mike Clayton. He's been waiting patiently. Mike.
Just as a point, I don't have all the exact numbers right in front of me, but I'm pretty sure the water fund has close to 2.4 or $2.5 million in it, not 1.4. I think our target is 2 million. And I think what happens is when you just look at the cash, you come up with a number about 1.4, but there's also about 1.1 million in Chase investments that are also part of the water fund. And so when you put it all together, we're over our target for the water fund by about $400,000. That's number one. Number two, my question is, I'm not used to seeing this without all SSAs involved and all of that. What has been the ratio in the past on average between the connection fees and the construction costs? Is that generally, where does that ratio sit on average?
I think if I should I try and answer that? I think that the board in the past sort of had an unofficial policy that the connection charges should cover the project or be within 10 to 15%. And there were a number of projects where some of the money was advanced from the general fund, partly because there were projects that weren't in SSAs and that were part of the backbone. And so to the extent that that was helping the whole village from fire protection, fire safety, and things like that. So some element of this project, for example, that you're creating a loop, you would consider, I think, as part of strengthening the backbone of the village. And you know, what happened at Thorn Meadow was that they have larger lots. Again, we're not really keeping up with the connection charge. When you multiplied the number of lots over in Thorn Meadow area, that times the cost times the connection charge, it just wasn't enough. But the only amount we had to increase was slight, maybe a couple of thousand a house for that in order for that to happen. So we don't have a history of having the residents in an area pay a lot more than the connection charge. We do have a history of the village saying, no, we can't afford it if the connection charges aren't close enough. unless there was a village benefit, a backbone of the water system, something that went beyond that area.
So the benefits of the two projects, as I understand it, is there was a lot of reference to fire and hydrants in the second situation. In this situation, there's no fire hydrant issue, but it's a question of looping the main. That's the main benefit to the village.
No, I mean, you'd get additional fire protection for the homes on Riverwoods Road as well. It's not as extreme as, on Thorn Meadow with no fire hydrants, but there is a fire protection benefit as well.
Let me go back. Rick was quoting a number I gave him yesterday. And as I just called up the balance sheet, and Mike Clayton is correct. We have 1.4 in cash. I didn't pick up the 1.1 million in investments. So it is about 2.5 right now in the water fund.
Oh, that makes me feel a little better. Thank you, Mike Clayton, for pointing that out.
Well, Rick, I'm sorry I picked up the wrong number for you, but I was glad I could at least get it while I was here.
That's okay. I guess I don't know. I'm a little concerned with, and I realize we're talking about, the backbone and that it's going to help, the whole village theoretically. But I'm also a little concerned about, what happens when there's another group that wants water and they pull this project up and they say, well, you only expected to get at maximum $258,000 if we did extensions 1 and 2, and you spent 560. We'd like the same consideration when we do our project. I guess I'm a little concerned about that because it's gonna, it could set a precedent. I would like to find out, who would want water in these 11 properties before we figure out which way we want to go, if we want to go at all.
No, what I'm taking from this evening's conversation is that Bruce, Pat, Russ, and I should be talking to all 11 of those properties and see what their interest is so that we know just exactly what we're dealing with. Especially since, again, I didn't realize we could cut through and make the loop work as well. So I think that one, guys, we've got an answer to. So now, Pat, your second question is on the table, I believe.
Yeah, so if you could please flip to the next map. So more recently, I was contacted by the owner at 1370 Little Woodland Lane. Similar situation, a lot of gloom and doom about the condition of his well water. Because we were considering 2375 running a service across other properties, I told him that, well, that's a consideration for you as well. Apparently, he's got a very good relationship with his neighbor across the street, and is entirely certain that he could get an easement across his property. As Bruce and I were talking about it, the better idea here would be to at least to extend water main, legitimate village water main, rather than a service across 1365 to once again, not set the precedent of the spaghetti service. B, bring some modicum of fire protection up and down Little Woodland Lane. This one, it does not pay for itself. A number, as you can see shaded in blue on this map, there are a number of homes on Little Woodland that are connected to the water main to the east on Clendenin. So they're not, they're not new connections. But again, we were trying to come up with what can we do to get Lake Michigan water to this resident who says he's got a real problem. As you can see, extension A just coming up from Crestwood on Little Woodland Lane doesn't come anywhere close to paying for itself either. Again, I'm just putting various ideas out for how we can get water service to people that are telling us that they're desperate for water service.
Pat, you might mention that if it's a water main coming across a village water main, where it terminates there, that maybe isn't clear, but that's a fire hydrant.
Correct. And so, it's, again, I am not at all advocating running individual services across multiple properties. Bruce and I could tell you stories in the village of Gulf where, it seems pretty clear 50 years later that the village was trying to get utility service to whoever needed it. And what it left the village with was all sorts of private improvements across other people's properties that were failing and they needed to get in and be fixed. It's not a good idea for the long term. So this was just another one where I thought the village should consider this. In this case, I could go back to the property owner and tell them that, the village would pay X toward this project. But then he's going to say, well, I don't want to pay for a water main and a fire hydrant. I just want to run my service over to Clendenin then.
Well, this shows what it looks like when you do all these little jumps here and there, because if we had those other three houses, it'd be closer. Rick, I think you were first, and then between Mike and Mike, I'm not sure. Mike Clayton's on top, so I'll let him go after you.
But if I could jump in quickly, those existing connections on Clendenin are not dissimilar to the connections on Arrowwood to the Ringland water main. And the difference there is the service isn't going across private property. It's not, the road is adjacent to the property being served. And I would make the point that, as I did in my memo, those three service connections that were paid whenever these houses connected should be considered in the bank towards some future project to bring water service down Little Woodland Lane.
So, okay, Rick.
So here's my concern, and I think we need to really step back and come up with a policy, because we've got two homeowners now that say, my well has failed, I don't have good water, I want to connect to the village main, and we are jumping through some hoops to do that. What happens when someone in South Riverwoods in Vernon Woods, where I live, on, let's say, Greenbrier, all the way back as far as you can go, tells you that their well has crapped out, and they want the same thing that you just did for 1370. Or somebody else that's not anywhere close to a water main is, wants, we're gonna open the floodgate to creating all these little projects for single homeowners. And I'm concerned about that, because even if the water fund has $2.5 million in it, here's 100,000 here, there's 500,000 from the previous project, that's 600,000 for two houses. And I know there's other people that might get connected at some point in time, and I realize there's a benefit here with fire hydrant. I'm all for fire hydrants, don't get me wrong. But I think we need to step back a second and think about a policy for what we're going to do when people come. Has anybody talked to this guy about at 1370 about digging a new well?
No, I have not.
No, he said they're all getting cancer and everything else in the area, so it's,
well,
no, but Rick, what you're saying is absolutely true. That's why we're talking tonight.
I'm sorry that that's the way the resident feels, but I'm more concerned about the next resident. What happens when 1350 comes and says the same thing? Now we got to come back down that thing down Woodland Lane for that house. And, or come up from whatever road that is, Crestwood. So that's where my concern is. I mean, and if we want to set a policy that says, you know, the connection fee of 23.5 or whatever the right number is, that's fine. And the village will come up with X number more, but anything after that you have to pay for. I'm okay with that, but you know, it has to meet our standards, and we're not going to let them do X if we want them to do Y. We have to, I think we're going to open a Pandora's box if we start spot feeding houses.
Yep. Mr. Clayton?
It seems like the economics of these projects works best when there's a larger number of homes involved than when there's a smaller number of homes involved. So it seems on the margin that the construction cost goes down a little faster than we collect additional, on a marginal basis, than we collect additional connection fees. So my question is, why can't we treat this like we normally would in an SSA and continue to extend Extension A north? Why does it have to stop there? Why can't we keep going and tell them, that neighborhood, that if they want water, they have to form an SSA and they have to come to us with 51% of the people wanting water?
Well, the question is, how many people want the water, Mike? And this, we don't have that many yet, because what you're saying is absolutely true. I'm not arguing with your basic logic. I'm just saying, I'm not sure that there's the demand for it up there. So
I would like municipal water. I'm in the middle of Blackthorn between water on Port Wine and water on Thorn Meadow. And I'm sorry, but unless I get 51% of my neighbors to agree, I'm not going to get water.
And I'm not arguing with you, Mike. I was just talking about why we don't extend it, et cetera.
I think Mike is.
Mike, just send a letter in that says your well has failed, and
we'll be talking about it. Let's move on, because I think we're pretty close in agreement. Mr. Haber?
Yeah, so I agree with both Trustee Jamerson and with Trustee Clayton. And I think the history is exactly that. In the past, we had a situation where we had multiple failures, and a significant portion of the Riverwoods population came to us and said, you know, we need water. And so we bent over backwards to try and accommodate that, but they still had to go to their neighbors and get a consensus. And then my recollection is that once they formed that SSA, everyone was required then to tap on. It wasn't voluntary. If you were part of that SSA, you were required to tap on, and you were required to pay that connection fee. And that's how we were able to extend the water.
Well, we taxed them, Mike, as if they were part of the SSA and they paid.
Right. Either way,
we didn't hit the connection fee because we didn't charge connection fee per se.
But they got taxed.
They still had to pay for it.
And so it seems to me that this should be no different. You know, if people need water, 1370 needs to go to his neighbors and say, look at guys, I'm having a problem. You're going to have a problem eventually, most likely at some time in the future. Can we start these discussions? And then they should come to us. But at the same time, I think that this connection fee is obviously no longer suitable. And we should be thinking about adjusting that even right now, because it doesn't appear like it's anything close to what is a reasonable number. So regardless of whether or not we extend to 1370 or we extend to the guy on Riverwoods Road, we should definitely be, you know, thinking about, and I think DeWalt Hamilton should be thinking about what a more reasonable, you know, connection fee is now, because I assume costs have gone up, et cetera.
Eric, did you have something you wanted to add? Were you, if not?
I did. I was just in agreement with
okay.
Trustee Jamerson. I think the trend is, it appears that the trend is going to continue to have more people. My whole street's eventually going to need a water main too. And if one person goes out, then we're going to be asking for the same thing. So I totally agree with everybody.
Cheryl, I see you. Henry was.
So,
Cheryl, Henry was ahead of you. Let me.
Sorry.
Henry in.
There was an alternative way of financing this as it happened in our area, and I don't know how many people know about it. But for example, if 1370 on this particular graphic paid for the extension, $340,000 for the 8 homes coming down, that has been done. And then that individual would get reimbursed as each one of those 8 houses or other 7 houses tapped on to recoup his costs. That was how it was done, at least in our area, where the developer.
That's been done several times, Henry, so that nobody's offered to pay the 340 yet.
You pay the money, and the people who tap on, you get that money
Yeah,
back.
recapture fee.
You're right. I'm not so certain this is going to work in many areas, but it is an alternative where the village doesn't then have to come up with the excess money, but it's paid back to the initial person.
Okay, Cheryl?
So I think it's pretty clear that everybody's saying, however we treat what's happening on Woodland, we should treat Riverwoods Road the same. So in that, to take it one step further, if we're asking those people who want water to reach out, we need to be clear. Are we village going to approach people first, or are we requiring the resident to approach people first? And frankly, however we've done it in the past, I think that's how we should.
We've always done it in the past. Well, generally, we've done it through the residents doing it. What I would bring up as well, because I think I may be the only one that was on the board. Was it 12, Bruce? SSA 12 was the big water?
14.
14, okay. Virtually everybody up here, I believe, had the opportunity to sign on to an SSA here for water 20 years ago. And most of these properties, I can't say it's the same owners, opted out at the time. So I'm not nearly as sympathetic here as I might be in other places. Because we told them you're going to change your mind later and come back.
I remember that.
I think you were on one of the others though, Cheryl, because I think Roy was still the mayor at the time.
No, I was a resident around the corner, and
okay.
I was not able to be in the SSA.
And so, again, I have some sympathy, but not completely. So I think we're back. And what I'll say is it just that you can see where we pick up little things here, little things there. And we were afraid this would happen, that it would become unpracticable to do these things because we didn't have enough people signing up. So we'll have to look at the tap-on fee and see what we can do. But Pat, I think we got pretty clear direction as to where.
No, actually, I think we have conflicting direction. And I think Trustee Chamberlain was hitting it on the head, because what we were told on Riverwoods Road was for the village to put information together and get it out to all.
Well, okay, I see your point.
And here we're saying
Yes.
we're going to put it on this guy.
Well, Riverwoods Road, I'm a little more interested in us doing it for our benefit with the real looping there. But either way, it's to the homeowners, and they've got to be willing to be able to pay the bill and get enough people.
Well, perhaps it can be simultaneous, that we set, kind of like we send out a notice that, your neighbors may be approaching you to form an SSA.
Well, we in the past have given people the paper and we've helped with letters and things like that, but we've always.
I just don't want to do it a different way on Riverwoods Road than we're doing on Woodland, because as soon as we do that, then whichever way somebody likes, they'll say, hey, why don't you do that for me? You did it for that other person.
Then we will do it that way unless there's objection from somebody else. We'll put it on the residents and we'll assist them. Right. Okay, good enough. Now I think we do have the consensus of where we're going with that. Okay. Are there any other comments with this? Did I hear somebody? No.
Can we get an estimate though of what the extension would be from Big Oak? How much cheaper it would be if we did just the Big Oak loop to Riverwoods Road? So
yeah, we can give you all the information. And as I said, I didn't think we could cut through there. I didn't realize that would be a sufficient loop as well. So,
well, bear in mind that as it stands, we can't cut through there. We would need some cooperation.
Right, we know that. But
Emails, Bruce?
it'd be good to know what the price though is.
Okay, understood.
We'll get it.
Well, believe it or not, that was just the discussion and information items. So hopefully it'll move a little faster. We have no emails from people wishing to address the board. Move on to approval of bills. Do I have a motion for approval of bills?
So moved.
Okay, I'll take that as a motion in a second. Questions, discussion? I think everybody's already asked questions. It's working better for us with what we're doing, and we like this system of getting the bills out. I hate to have done it because of COVID. If anybody's having any problems, let me know tomorrow, but I appreciate everybody's cooperation. Hearing no further discussion, roll call, please.
Trustee Chamberlain,
Aye.
trustee Clayton,
Aye.
trustee Goldstein,
Aye.
trustee Haber,
Aye.
trustee Hollander,
Aye.
and trustee Jamerson.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Moving on to new business. Consideration of waiving shops payments and request for assistance on certain projects. I sent out a follow-up, I believe, no, it was on the notes, I guess, that they owe about $15,000 for what they haven't paid. I did receive a suggestion that from trustee Goldstein that I thought was good, which is that we waive what they haven't paid and maybe some amount in the future, but on the stipulation that they spend it on the improvements that they've been talking about making. So I throw it open to the floor. Mike? You're still muted, Mike.
I think the problem with that suggestion though is when I read those, and I think it's a good suggestion, but I think the problem with it is that they're representing that they passed on that savings to the tenants. When you read those emails, the emails from Avalon said that they passed on that saving to the tenant. Now, I thought that was strange. I didn't really necessarily believe it, but if it's true, if we go to them and say we want them to use it for improvements, they're going to say, well, we don't have it. The tenants have it.
Okay.
The other thing about that, Mike, is that what they said, at least what I read, was that they gave it back to the tenants in pro rata of their square footage. Well, they have 2 huge empty spaces in there right now that have no tenants. So they kept part of the money, for sure.
So, well, I'll be, Mr. Clayton, you look like you're unmuted and ready to talk, or just unmuted?
No, here we go. I'm probably a lone voice in the wilderness on this particular topic, but I think we all know that our objective is to act in the best interest of our residents. And the issue here is which is best? Do we want to prove a point that and be moved by the personalities that have been involved in the past? Or do we want to take some action to improve, to take some steps to get a viable retail center? I think the whole history of the non-payment of the special use fees is something that, at least from my standpoint, is debatable as to, I mean, they had an indication and we discussed that we were favorably disposed to do that. We said it was okay if they answered certain questions. They answered those questions, they heard nothing back, and they went ahead and stopped paying. And they didn't hear back from us that they should start paying. I think that there are some ground rules that we could establish for assistance to them. I think it has to, as it's been mentioned before, it has to benefit the business operators, not the property owners, and it needs to be targeted to the extent possible to attracting new sales taxpayers. But I think there's a long run benefit of sustaining the relationship with Avalon, including the integration with whatever happens with Federal Life, the 37 acres and so on. And so my proposal would be to forgive the special use fees that are unpaid now, to contribute $30,000 towards the improvement of the north intersection, which I think is the biggest bang for the buck that the either current operators or future operators within the shopping center would get benefit from rather than signs or anything else. And that I also continue to believe that we should be formulating some kind of a retail attraction and assistance program to try to attract additional retail operators into the center. But I guess my core thing right now is I think if we don't forgive the fees, I think we have now then terminated the relationship with Avalon.
Okay, as
think-
far as, Mike, for clarification, what about future special use fees?
No, I'm talking, they should have to start paying the special use fees
Okay.
now.
Because
Just
you
like
talked about the
just
past.
like we're doing for the Holiday Inn. Okay, and then I would also propose that we contribute $30,000 towards the $58,000 that they quoted for improving the north intersection. That's
Okay, just trying to be sure. Henry?
Are you suggesting that we then give the next 15 months of special use fees and put it towards the access point? Or are you saying we give them the 30,000 separate and apart from that?
I'm suggesting we give them, I'm suggesting that we forgive what they haven't paid, the 15,000 they haven't paid so far. And now we give them a cash grant of $30,000, whatever form that needs to take, to improve the intersection on the north end of the shopping center.
And continue to collect the fees.
And pardon me?
And continue to collect the fee.
Yes,
Resume collecting, I think. Mike.
resume collecting the fees.
Yes, Rick and then Eric, and then Mike.
So I guess I could go along with your plan, Mike. You know, we've fought with these guys before you got on the board about paying the fee. They quit paying it and we had to take them to court to get them to pay it. And it's not necessarily Avalon. You have to remember it's the owners that are behind Avalon. If we decide to give them money for the intersection improvement, which I don't have a problem with giving them money to do that, I think we should do it as a 50% split of the actual money that they pay up to a certain amount. I don't think we should just give them $30,000 because if it costs them $45,000, they're going to keep, you know, so that's my suggestion on that one. I'm a little ambivalent one way or the other about you know, trying to get them to pay the past due amount. I don't think that's ever going to happen. We're going to end up taking them to court again. So that's my opinion.
Eric?
Yeah, I was gonna say I can go along with that plan too. And I was gonna suggest a 50-50 split as well. I think that we'll match them up to a certain dollar amount as well. So I agree with Rick and I agree with Michael Clayton as well.
Mr. Haber?
Yeah, I have no problem with the $15,000 deferral. I am vehemently opposed to giving them $30,000 towards that improvement. They have a serious situation on their hands at that center, and they have a huge investment in that center. And if they can't come up with $60,000 to improve their center, to bring it to where they think they're going to be able to get new leasing, then these are not the type of even businessmen that I even think we should be concerned about. That is a drop in the bucket for that center, $60,000 to make that type of improvement. They shouldn't be even thinking about it. They should just do it and pay for it. They shouldn't be looking to us. I think we'd be much better off doing a different type of plan with them, which would be maybe like a facade plan or something to beautify the center, to make it more attractive to tenants, but not to fix that ingress or egress, because that is something that is a fundamental problem with the center that they as owners should be correcting. And at $60,000, that cost is de minimis.
And I would point out that for at least the 7 years that I've been mayor, we've been trying to talk them into doing just what Trustee Haber said. Even talked about working with them on it, and they never were too anxious to take our money then, because they'd have to spend some of their own money. And, you know, but it is a point too that we do need to not just think in terms of being angry with the past owners. but what's
Just
the
in
best?
terms of clarification,
Yes,
their proposal is to spend like $325,000, I think, on the center. The road was one piece of that.
okay. Cheryl,
So as far as the past due fees, I agree. I don't think we're gonna ever get it back. Just waive that and start charging and make it clear that, yes, you are absolutely paying now. And then as far as going in on construction with them, the problem that I have with this situation, not even they, but through Avalon have said, this is what we're going to do and you pay half, instead of talking with us as we had suggested before. Hey, what would be the best thing for this center and how can we work together? Because when we talked about this many years ago, we had checked in with our architect, and the architect said, as far as making that center, I mean, obviously we didn't have the construction at the corner, but he said, he suggested a plan where they improved the look of it simply by doing awnings across the front of it, and making sure the signage above the awnings was similar, and that would do one of the least expensive ways to improve the aesthetics. And we haven't discussed any of these things with them. And my biggest problem is that they're telling us how it has to be. And I am not at all convinced that the way that they have gone about evaluating what they're going to do is really the best business decision that could be made.
Mr. Clayton, and then Mr. Hollander.
I guess my attitude on that is that improving the appearance of a center that you can't get into is not going to be helpful in terms of producing a viable center, no matter how pretty it looks. I think that number one. Number two, this was the fourth in a series of meetings that we've had with Avalon, and in some cases, the owners, the Flanagans, to talk about different alternatives to improving the center and what we could do together. The result of this proposal was the result of conversations that we've had in meetings, at least 3 meetings up until this point. So we're not being dictated to. I mean, we may not want to do it. I understand that. But this is something that we jointly arrived at. And I do think the intersection is something that infrastructure is something that's consistent with the village's mission. And I think the most important thing to producing a viable retail center is access at this particular point.
Okay, Henry?
Yeah, I wanted to, maybe I can build on that. Just to clarify with Cheryl, we asked them for their ideas and what they think would help them. And this is what they came up with. And we have met with them several times. It really isn't our job to figure out what the best business solution is to correct their problem. That's not our function. But there are 3 choices. And the one that we haven't talked about tonight, which signage, was also a 3rd choice. I have mixed minds about it. One, I think the access is important for whomever owns this center, whether it's the Flanagans today or Avalon or 5 years from now. That's going to benefit us as well. I also want to remind the board that we were told specifically that if we don't pay for half this construction, they're not going to do it. And I felt badly about hearing that. So we do have a choice. If you don't think that the access route is something we can support, signage certainly is something else. I don't think we ought to be going back to them with our business ideas about awnings or something else, because I don't think we're experts in that.
Okay,
Can
Mike,
I-
and then I'm going to start cutting this off.
Can I jump in for a second, Mike?
Okay,
Would you-
Mr. Haber, will you yield to Mr.
I'll
Hooper?
yield.
I just want to pose the issue to the board in a different direction, because there are a lot of policy questions here. But if you ask me as a legal matter, how the village would be protected if we hand money over to them and wait for the road improvement to be done, and what you would expect that agreement to look like, I would say, But if you said the village would develop the improvement plan and we would collect half the money from them and we would construct the improvement, I think you'd have a much better shot of knowing that the improvement was going to be done. But if you ask me, how can the village be assured that we hand money to them and we end up with the roadway improvement? Or what if they don't do it? When you hand an owner like that money, they have to probably put it in an operating account. For all I know, the operating account is subject to the pledge of their bank. So as soon as you give village money over to somebody, it starts to become subject to the claims of other parties. So if you were asking, if your decision was to how do you make sure that the village is protected when it hands over money like this for an improvement that it expects to be done, I mean, we normally try and wrap our hands around things like that to make sure that we have control and that the thing is actually done. And in this case, my recommendation would be to reverse it from that standpoint alone, so that the village has the funds and the village is the one that's doing the project.
But we'd have to pay prevailing wage, which is a drawback under that circumstance.
I'm not sure I'm not
No?
exactly
Okay.
sure that.
I like your general idea, Bruce. I agree with you about keep the money and keep control. We all know
Well,
that one.
if you ask me about it.
Yeah, Mike Haber, and then I want to try to move this a little bit.
Yeah, just so that I have understanding as to what that improvement is supposed to accomplish. Am I correct that the improvement is to allow for southbound traffic on Milwaukee Avenue to get into the north entrance of the center?
Yes, it's to be a full entrance exit.
Okay, and that situation arose as a result of Woodman's and the enforcement of the cheating that people who were going southbound on Milwaukee Avenue would sometimes go in the out exit on the north side of the center. But the reality is that is how that center was constructed from day one. So nothing has changed at that center as a result of Woodman's. So this center has had the problem from the beginning of time, and the center has always had serious vacancies. So where has this owner been to correct this problem over the last 15 years? And then, or longer, I don't know how long that center's been there. And it's not suddenly that there's vacancies. Yes, there's more vacancies now since Chase moved over to Woodman's and Panera moving over to the Woodman's development, or across from Woodman's. But that's always been there. And for them to give us an ultimatum to say that we're not going to fix our investment unless you pay for half of it is offensive.
Okay, the center was built in 1980 by predecessors to everybody involved now. Rick, I'll let you go one more time, and then I want to try to do something.
I just want to correct what Trustee Haber said. The northbound entrance has always been a right in, right out.
I think so.
Right.
That's the way it's always been.
Too close to the light.
South entrances, the one at the bank and the one at Panera, you could always turn left.
I know that.
There is a change in circumstance.
The issue happened when Woodman's, when the intersection was changed and they put that 6-inch median up there.
Okay.
That's what caused the entrance problem. It didn't cause the vacancy problem. We know that. So, but
Okay, at this point, let me ask for a motion in relation to the unpaid fees, whether you're waiving them or whatever we're doing.
So moved, waiver.
second,
With the understanding that we're only waiving in the past and they're going to pay
I
going.
was going to ask for that. That's in your
Correct.
motion, Mr. Haber, and that
It
the
is in my
second
motion.
accepts. Okay.
Yes.
Any discussion on that? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Trustee Chamberlain,
Aye.
trustee Clayton,
Aye.
trustee Goldstein,
Aye.
trustee Haber,
Aye.
trustee Hollander,
Aye.
trustee Jamerson.
aye.
Okay, now as to any village contribution towards the future project, I would entertain a motion on that.
Well, I'll jump into that. I'd like to move that the village reimburse the center for the total cost, once totally constructed the new intersection and paid for it, that once we see proof that it's all been paid for, then, and it costs the $58,000 that they estimate or more, or somewhere close to that, then we reimburse them $30,000.
Can I suggest you word that we reimburse them up to $30,000 against proven expenses for construction?
Thank you. That was much more elegant.
What about equal, you don't want to just give them 30, you want to give them matching amounts.
Up to 50% or 50% up to 30.
Right.
Is how I worded that. Is there a second?
I'll second that, I guess.
Okay. Any further discussion on that? Hearing none, may have a roll call on a motion to be willing to reimburse the owners up to $30,000 on a 50% basis against construction of the intersection on the north end of the shopping center.
Once it's complete.
For reading
Once
that.
it's completed, right, reimbursement, once it's completed, 50% up to 30,000.
And just for clarity on the motion, does that include hard and soft costs?
It's your motion, Mike. I may have worded it.
No, just hard costs.
So we reimburse only hard costs, 50%. Okay. Rick, you accept that as,
Sure.
okay. Well, second has to accept it or you'd have to vote on it. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Trustee Chamberlain,
Nay.
trustee Clayton,
Aye.
trustee Goldstein,
Aye.
trustee Haber,
Nay.
trustee Hollander,
Aye.
trustee Jamerson.
Aye.
4-2.
Correct.
You do a
Okay.
reluctant vote?
Say again.
You do a reluctant vote?
We don't get to talk about whether it was happy or frowning. Okay, moving on to the Holiday Inn and their request for waiving of the special use fee, not the hotel tax, just to be clear. I would ask for a motion to forgive that through the end of the year.
So moved.
Do I hear a second? We'll still have discussion if you want, but. No, that's not a second.
I'll second.
Who made the motion? I'm sorry.
Mike Clayton.
Mike Clayton.
Thank you.
Okay, discussion.
What's the total amount that would be?
It would be, let's see, it's about $10,000 with where we're sitting. Plus through the end of the year, because I've forgone it for the last month and a half.
So,
Yes, Rick,
so how much is it a month? Do we know? Somebody?
it's 1,500, I believe.
I thought that's the number that came into my head.
Yeah.
15.
So will this be the last time we do this for them?
Well, that's again up to you guys. I would hope that everything will be back to a better footing by then. They have been improving, but Lord knows where this is all going. Mike,
Is anyone interested in doing something like an abatement with accrual? And at some point in the future, when they get back on track and their occupancy is up to 60% or 70%, that they start to pay it back.
you know, at this point, I think I would still prefer to just waive this, but if they ask for any more, I think that would be an appropriate way to do it. Because they're still having some problems. And again, these have been good people. Could we find another hotel at some point? Yeah, but how long is it empty? And how, we don't know who we get running it. And the chief will tell you that it could be an issue. So
Right, but I mean, I think the abatement is basically what they need right now.
Oh, I understand, Mike, and I'm not necessarily opposing overall. Cheryl, did I see you waving your hand, or were you just, oh, if you weren't, then Rick,
My only comment would be, I think we would have to look at the percentage because I don't know that they've ever been at 60 to 70%. I think when this
Oh.
whole thing started, were they up that
they
high?
were, that's where they were before.
Oh, okay.
So that number would be appropriate. Yeah, oh, Chief,
2,700, just for clarification. Per month? Yes. Oh, okay.
So can't hear you, John.
so busy, I'm so busy getting the chief unmuted that I forgot to unmute me. At 2,700 a month, the chief said. So we would be looking at 7,500 through the end of the year.
You know, I think the problem is that, just where I'm coming from, is that, you know, the village is having problems too as a result of COVID.
No
But
question.
our expenses are staying the same. And no one is giving us a break from those expenses. And, you know, and I can just take it in my own, you know, my own business. You know, I don't have a break from my landlord. And when I go into court for clients who can't pay child support because they've been laid off, it gets accrued. It gets abated, but it gets accrued. They're not off the hook because the expenses of the spouse who's getting support continue. Well, we're the spouse here. You know, our expenses continue. So I don't have a problem helping someone through hard times, but I think a forgiveness is not necessarily what they need. They need an abatement.
Mike, then I would suggest make a motion to amend the motion to change it to abating rather than just forgiving.
Okay, I'll make that motion.
Is there a second on the motion to modify the motion on the floor to abating rather than forgiving?
I would second that, but I'd like to know what the parameters were for the abatement because we didn't discuss that.
Good point, good point. Mike stated whatever you believe appropriate.
Yeah, I think bring, you know, at such point where they return to an occupancy of 60%, then they should, you know, pay it back and it can be extended over, I don't even really care. It can be 2
Well,
years, you
Okay,
know,
we'll say 2 years
2 years over 2 years
as a number.
with no interest.
Okay,
Because it's significant. It's like $2,700 a month. That's not a, you know, that's not a little.
no argument, Mike. We're just trying to clarify right now. So you'll second that, Rick?
I would second that.
Okay, further discussion on the motion to amend. Hearing none, roll call, please.
Trustee Chamberlain,
Aye.
trustee Clayton,
Nay.
trustee Goldstein,
Aye.
trustee Haber,
Aye.
trustee Hollander,
Aye.
trustee Jamerson.
Aye.
All right, so we have on the floor now a motion to abate the payments through, we didn't make that clear. Is it just through the end of the year, which is what we talked about before, or, okay. And so that's the motion on the floor with up to 2 years once they return to 60% to repay at no interest. Any further discussion on that motion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Trustee Chamberlain,
Aye.
trustee Clayton,
Nay.
trustee Goldstein,
Aye.
trustee Haber,
Aye.
trustee Hollander,
Aye.
trustee Jamerson.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Well, here's one that I'm not sure anybody wants to approve. The police purchase of new tasers is the next item of business. Does anybody want to hear from the chief, or do I have a motion to approve?
I
So
move we
moved.
approve.
Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Trustee Chamberlain,
Aye.
trustee Clayton,
Aye.
trustee Goldstein,
Aye.
trustee Haber,
Aye.
trustee Hollander,
Aye.
trustee Jamerson.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Now, the next item, as council expressed in the second memo that we gave you, in order to have the increase that we're proposing or looking at for the tax, we have to state the amount of tax to be raised by the village property tax levy in 2020. Bruce, you want to explain a little more?
I wish I could explain a lot more, but I can't really. The truth in taxation law says that if the amount we extend that we wish to collect in taxes is more than 5% above what we extended last year, we need to hold a hearing. And then there's another section that says if you're going to hold a hearing, before you hold the hearing, you should adopt or determine or have an estimate of the amount that you intend to raise by property tax. I guess the idea is you give like another type of notice to the public when you make this determination before you schedule the hearing. So the amount that is in the memo was arrived at with the help of our finance committee and Mike Clayton, is the increase above last year's extension, the percentage increase that the board had talked about to restore the balance between revenues and expenses. So the number is 824,500. And when we publish for the Truth in Taxation hearing, there will be a notice that will be in the paper that will have that sum in there and explained what sort of percentage increase it represents over the extension in the prior year. So the notice will be published then before the regular board meeting on December 1, we'll have the hearing. When the hearing is adjourned, we'll then go into the regular board meeting at which we can take up the tax levy ordinance. So really are just looking for a motion to approve the estimate of the amount of the police levy at $824,500 to be raised for the 2020 tax year, which will be collected in 2021.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Second.
Can't hear you,
Read
John.
it, John.
Sorry about that. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Trustee Chamberlain.
Aye.
Trustee Clayton,
Aye.
trustee Goldstein,
Aye.
trustee Haber,
Aye.
trustee Hollander,
Aye.
trustee Jamerson.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Under old business, the consideration of and possible approval of the recommended upgrade to the water meter reading system. Pat is still working on that. We have a meeting scheduled for later this week. So we don't have the information the board requested, so it's not ready to go forward. I know of no reason to go into executive session. Does anyone have anything for the good of the order? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Go raise.
Second.
All right, roll call, please.
Trustee Chamberlain,
Aye.
trustee Clayton,
Aye.
trustee Goldstein,
Aye.
trustee Haber,
Aye.
trustee Hollander,
Aye.
trustee Jamerson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Stay safe, everybody.